Hello again, my friends. My name is Pavlo Lapikov, and welcome to the Fire Safety Philosophy podcast. I am not just an engineer on paper, I am a field engineer and, in many ways, an officer in my soul. Over the years, I've learned that even the most beautiful engineering drawings don't always work in the real world. That gap between design and reality is one of the reasons I started this podcast, because I care about lives. This podcast is not just about codes and calculations, it's about asking the big questions. What does safety really mean? Why do we settle for minimums as if they are enough? How can we do better? Here, I share stories from the field, lessons from history, and ideas for the future, always with one goal: to care about lives and to think beyond compliance. After the first episode, a friend asked me, "Pavlo, will you ever tell the world about all the troubles you've been through?" And I realized those troubles aren't just personal stories. There are lessons about why safety matters. I've nearly lost my life more than once. Twice in a fire, once in a car accident, once from falling headfirst off the third floor of a construction site, once during blasting operation in a mine, when the rock collapsed, nearly drowned as a child, accidentally shot once, nearly killed by high voltage, and nearly died from Botkin's disease, hepatitis, that left me fighting for life. None of those moments were my fault. They happened while I was living, working, or simply doing my duties. Every time, the reason was the same: people stopped worrying about safety. Processes that are fire hazardous, explosive, or otherwise dangerous slowly become routine. People get used to them, and what we once called dangerous starts to look ordinary. That's when tragedy happens. This is why I say fire safety is more philosophy than engineering. Safety isn't just about ticking boxes or passing inspection. It's about how we think, how we prepare, and how we treat risk. Safety is never absolute. Safety is controlled risk. And how we control it decides whether we survive or not. Professionally, I've spent more than 20 years as a fire safety engineer, working as an inspector, investigator, fire protection and ventilation engineer, and consultant. I've served in fire departments, architectural firms, mining operations, nuclear facilities, and energy projects. I grew up in Latvia, studied in Ukraine, and worked across North and South Europe before moving to Canada. For the last 5 years, I live in Toronto, and recently I relocated to Calgary. And yes, I've got a funny European accent. If you hear a mix of Baltic and Canadian in my words, that's me. So when I speak here, it's not just theory, it's lived experience. Safety is not paperwork or drawings, it's life. And I've had enough to close calls to know we cannot afford to forget it. That's why this podcast exists, to rethink what it means to be safe and to remind us that caring about safety is really about caring for people. Today's big question: why is fire safety more philosophy than engineering? Alright, let's take a quick break and then we'll jump right back into fire philosophy. This podcast is brought to you by Fireheart Fire Safety Marketing Agency. At Fireheart, we help fire safety professionals, companies, and educators share their mission with the world. From bold posters to unforgettable campaigns, we turn safety into culture. Because saving lives isn't just about systems, it's about communication, Learn more at firehardfsma.com. So, let's back to the show. When people think of fire safety, they picture sprinklers, alarms, fire trucks, and hardware. But here is the truth. Before you install a single sprinkler head or draw a single line on your CAD file, you need to ask questions. A lot of questions. Who are we protecting? What is the real risk? Flames, smoke, panic, or toxic gases? What happens if systems fail? How much risk can we accept before it becomes immoral? Do we really need a fire alarm, or is the sprinkler system enough? Do we need mechanical ventilation or a full smoke extraction system? Do we want one central control system, or will every system operate separately? Do we build a proper drilling program or an educational system to train people better? Do we need a fire safety plan, a fire emergency plan, an accident response plan, or even a full fire emergency management plan? Is our building operating 24 hours or just 8 hours a day? Because sometimes, it might actually be cheaper and safer to have a volunteer firefighting team on site than to install expensive protection systems and pay for endless maintenance. These are the kind of questions philosophy asks, because sometimes it's not about the system itself. Sometimes it's about whether people are trained, whether the building is occupied at night, whether money is better spent on drills and education than on shiny equipment that no one understands. This is philosophy. Engineering gives us the tools, but philosophy tells us why and how to use them. I like to say engineering is the hands, but philosophy is the brain. Engineering builds systems. It gives us our sprinklers, alarms, staircases, fire doors, ventilation shafts. But philosophy asks, will people actually use them? Will people actually trust them? Will these systems work in the real world, not just in design drawings? You can design the most beautiful sprinkler system in the world, perfect coverage, perfectly calculated flow. But if the owner decides to shut off the valve to save money on maintenance, that system becomes a decoration. No water, no protection, just pipes in the ceiling. You can design wide staircases, compliant with every part of the code. But if people don't trust the fire alarm, if they think it's just another drill, they won't even start moving. And a staircase with no people in it saves no one. You can use the most fire-resistant materials, tested in laboratories to withstand flames for hours. But if someone blocks the emergency exit with boxes, chairs, or locked chains, people won't escape. Materials don't save lives if human behavior traps people inside. That's why philosophy always asks, what is the real human problem here? Because often the problem is not the fire itself. It's fear, it's panic, it's mistrust, it's ignorance, and sometimes it's arrogance, the belief that it won't happen to us. So, when I say fire safety is more philosophy than engineering, this is what I mean. Systems and materials alone cannot save people. It's the way we think, prepare, and behave that decides survival. Philosophy forces us to step back and ask, will people actually believe this alarm? Will they know how to use this exit? Will the owner keep this system active after inspection day? Will workers react in panic or in practiced confidence? Without those questions, engineering is just drawings on paper. With those questions, engineering becomes meaningful. That's why, my friends, fire safety will always be more philosophy than engineering. Alright, let's take a quick break and then we'll jump right back into fire philosophy. This episode is powered by Fireheart Fire Safety Marketing Agency. We believe safety should be seen, heard, and remembered. That's why Fireheart creates powerful campaigns and visuals that don't just meet compliance, they inspire culture. If you've ever thought, how do I make people actually care about safety? Fireheart is the answer. Check out fireheartfsma.com. So, let's back to the show. When I start a project, I don't ask, what kind of sprinkler system should we use? No, that's step 10. Step 1 in philosophy. Questions like, who will occupy this building? How will they behave under stress? What's the most dangerous scenario? Smoke, fire spread, or toxic release? What happens if systems fail at the worst possible moment? How do we drill people without drilling? How do we educate people without education? That feels boring or forced. How do we create systems that people actually trust? Alarm they believe, exit they use, instruction they follow. These are the questions that matter. Because you can design the most advanced systems, but if the people inside ignore them or panic, all your engineering becomes a fire trap. Engineering is execution. Philosophy is survival. In Toronto, I reviewed a high-rise office building where the owner told me straight, just give me the cheapest option, as long as it meets code. That's the wrong philosophy. Because yes, technically the building already had sprinklers, alarms, and everything required on paper. But the real problem wasn't their systems. It was the people. During a fire drill it becomes obvious. Tenants had no idea where to go, which stairwell to use, or even how to react. Some stayed at their desks, some tried to take the elevators, some just froze. And in a real fire, that confusion would cost lives. The biggest risk wasn't even the people who worked there every day. It was new employees and visitors. On any given day, around 10% of the people inside were guests, clients, contractor, delivery staff, or interviewees. They didn't know the roads. They had no idea how the alarms worked. And they were the most vulnerable. Guests always follow others. And if the others don't know what to do, everyone is lost together. So the solution wasn't just about upgrading drawings or hardware. We fixed parts of the design, yes, but more importantly, we trained the tenants. We walked them through real drills, gave instructions, and made sure even new workers and guests had clear guidance, both in person and through an emergency app that showed evacuation routes and safe exits on their phones. Because a building can have all the protection in the world, but if the people inside don't know how to escape, it's not a safe building. It's a trap. When I worked in mining, the biggest question was never how many extinguishers should we hang on the wall. That was too small. The real question was far heavier. If smoke fills the tunnel, how long do my people have to reach the surface alive? Imagine it, hundreds of meters underground, one narrow shaft, and fire starting to breathe inside the rock. Down there, fire doesn't just burn, it eats the air. It steals the oxygen before flames even reach you. You don't have the option to run outside. The mine itself becomes your coffin if you miscalculate. So, philosophy was everything. How do we ventilate? Slow it down, push smoke away long enough for people to escape. How many minutes can we buy? 10, 15? That question of minutes, not extinguishers, was the true measure of safety on the ground. That is philosophy. If you miss it, you don't just lose a system, you lose lives. When I worked in nuclear, the biggest question was never, where do we put the hydrants? Too small. The real question was much bigger, almost terrifying. How do we design this plan so that failure is impossible? Because in nuclear, fire is not just a fire. A fire in the wrong cable tray control room could trigger cascading failure that affect millions. So every decision carried weight. Every wall, every cable, every duct had to be flawless. In Canada's CANDU reactor, you don't just have one backup. You have 4 independent shutdown systems. 4 each designed separately, so if 1, 2, or 3 fail, the last one still saves the plan. That's philosophy. Not what the cheapest way to pass inspection, but what the worst that could happen and how do we make sure it never does. Philosophy in nuclear means admitting failure is possible, then designing a world where those failures cannot take lives. Fire safety, life safety, and nuclear safety combined into one mechanism that must work every single time. That is philosophy. When I worked around nuclear, these were the 10 most important fire safety questions we always asked. What happened if fire disables multiple safety systems at once? How do we stop a single cable fire from cascading into plant-wide failure? How do we protect the control room from smoke and heat? What redundant system are in place if fire disables the first line of defense? How do we ensure power to emergency cooling during fire? What evacuation routes exist if radiation and fire overlap? How do we separate fire safety, life safety, and nuclear safety, yet make them work as one? What is the worst case fire scenario, and how fast does it become catastrophic? How do we train staff so they don't freeze and panic but act with precision? And finally, if everything fails, what is our last line of defense? These are not just engineering details. These are philosophical questions. Alright, let's take a quick break and then we'll jump right back into fire safety philosophy. A big thank you to today's sponsor, Fireheart, Fire Safety Marketing Agency. Fireheart exists because fire safety messages deserve modern tools. Posters, training programs, creative campaigns. Fireheart makes safety unforgettable because safety isn't just a job, it's a culture. Visit fireheartfsma.com to learn more. So, let's back to the show. So, why is fire safety more philosophy than engineering? Because before you choose a system, before you draw a line, you must ask the real questions. You must think about human factor, the culture, the ethics, the memory of past tragedies. And let me say this clearly. Before you start a design, you don't just open the building code and copy-paste requirements. The code is important, yes, but it is a minimum. And minimum is not always the right choice for the building you are drawing. Every building is unique. Every risk profile is different. Sometimes the code gives you the floor, but the ceiling is much higher. And sometimes the safest choice is not following the minimum, but going beyond it. That's when you need to look from different perspectives. Maybe science and laboratory testing will show you a better option. Maybe performance or based design will prove a safer path. Because risk can be less or risk can be higher. And the code alone doesn't always see the difference. Engineering gives us the hands, philosophy gives us the brain, and together they give us hope. So, my friends, remember, fire safety is not about sprinklers or alarms. It starts much earlier. It starts with questions, with philosophy. And whether we are building an apartment, a mine, or a nuclear power plant, the truth is the same. Safety is not absolute. Safety is controlled risk. And how we control it defines how safe and even how happy we are. And let me add, this is just my opinion, but I believe the best way to protect people in case of fire is not only systems, it's education and drilling. You can design the most advanced protection system in the world, but if the people inside the building, tunnel, or mine are uneducated and untrained, the building becomes a fire trap. Education and drills turn panic into action. They transform fear into survival. And no sprinkler, no hydrant, no wall can replace it. This was episode 2 of the Fire Safety Philosophy podcast. Next time, on Wednesday, we'll talk about the illusion of safety, limits we see reality. And believe me, it will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about codes, and how different safe on paper can be from real safety in the field. If today made you think, hit subscribe, share this with a colleague or a friend, and leave me a review. That's how we build this community together. I am Pavlo Lapikov. Care about lives, think beyond compliance. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay safe, and don't play with matches. Bye bye.